I was born in May 1939. I grew up in the southern Appalachians in northern part of Georgia. Uh, People used to call us ridge runners. My brother Jerry was the oldest, and then my sister Dorothy, and then me, and then Johnny. So I was in the middle of the family. My little brother got diphtheria and passed away, and that was in '45. And 2 weeks later, my dad died of a coronary at age 31. I was like 5 years old when my dad died, and hardly remember much about him. So my mom was kind of left with three kids to bring up. She was taken out of school when she was in the fourth grade because my grandpa and grandma had like 13 children, and they had a little farm. They're trying to exist on growing their own vegetables and selling a few things here and there. And so it was kind of difficult for her. So she took in washing and ironing and things like that. And us kids did whatever we could find to do to earn a little bit of money. Picking a lot of berries. People with bigger farms had beans to be picked and corn to be gathered and things like that. The first place we moved to after the deaths of my dad and my brother was a little house with a dirt floor. It was a struggle. Her two older brothers kind of loaned her enough money to get our first house. The one we were living in was just a place. It was tough actually growing up there, and without a dad, I was a bit ornery too. But when I was about 14 years old, my mother had an illegitimate child, and so she's my half sister. I skipped the fifth grade and went from the fourth to the sixth, and I was so out of place. I struggled that whole year, but I passed. But I also dropped out of school my beginning of my senior year. I should have graduated in '56, but I got talked into another situation, and I went to Flint, Michigan, and I went to work for Buick Motors. I was making good money up there, but I knew I needed to go back to school. So I graduated in '57 instead of '50. See, I would have graduated before I was 17 years old. One of my high school friends, he dropped out of school, but he was a guitar player. I chummed around with him quite a bit, and his mom had a guitar too. And so I used to use hers to try to imitate what he was doing, you know. Well, I eventually learned the chords, and we had a piano player. I played the rhythm guitar, and he played an electric guitar. And we used to do dances, and they would have us come in. Well, we did a lot of go to my aunt's place and sing some tunes and play some tunes. Started to college. We had a little local college in the neighboring town there. It was a 2-year thing. One of my friends that lived in the neighboring town of Blairsville, he dared me to join the Navy with him. He didn't pass the physical to get in, and I wound up in San Diego. Didn't know a soul down there, and so I was a little homesick, but they put me in the hospital corpsman school. And so it's the equivalent of a licensed practical nurse. My first place I was stationed out of the hospital corps school was Pensacola, Florida. And they have a big naval base there, and it was in a 500-bed hospital. Worked all the different floors, medical floor, surgical floor. But once you got everything, did so much time in each place, then you could pick something that you wanted to do. So I picked X-ray school. And so I got my X-ray training there. So all I had to do was do 6 months of externship, and I could get licensed nationwide. My wife that I was married to, I met her about 6 months later. She was in the Women's Hospital Corps. Her name is Winona Wolf. We were married in March of 1960, and we had a short period of time, 6 or 8 months, something like that, and we just kind of fell in love and got married. So we didn't have any of our relatives at our wedding. It was on the base with a Navy chaplain that married us. The radiologist that trained me, he walked Nona down the aisle, and one of my X-ray technician friends, well, he just passed away 6 months ago or so, but him and I were big buddies, and he was the best man. Every hitch that you do, 4-year hitch, you have to do 18 months of sea duty. So I chose 3 different ships off the East Coast, and they sent me to the Marine Corps because the Marines don't have any medics. So I went through a 16-week, they called it field medical school. You learn how to approach a victim under fire and do a lot of crawling on the ground, you know. And Laos and Cambodia was, you don't remember those, but they preceded Vietnam. And so that's where I wound up. I was stationed on Okinawa, but we floated the coast of Cambodia and Laos, and I finished my hitch there, and I loved the X-ray school part, you know, working in X-ray, but there was a big Army base over there in Okinawa called Camp Kui, and they were just crying for X-ray techs, and I tried to get transferred over to that hospital so I could get my experience under a radiologist, you know, but it was a no-go. So they put me in headquarters, a battalion, and I had a little portable X-ray machine. I could do chest X-rays and hands and skulls, things like that. And then when I finished my tour over there, I was due to get out. And I'd gone in on January 58. So I was really due in January, but I had enough time built up that they let me go. My wife had moved out to California, in Santa Cruz, California. Her sister had a job there, and she moved out there and found a job as an LPN, well, as a hospital corpsman, as an LPN training. So in the process of tracking down the radiologist that had to sign my application for a license, when I finally heard from him, he was in Anchorage, Alaska. In the process, he offered me a job up there. He put me to work as a chief technician, and I didn't have my license yet. He had trained me, so he knew my work, and I probably wasn't the best X-ray technician, but I knew enough to get by, you know. I had decided to go back to school because the GI Bill came along. The radiologist had taken a job in Stockholm, Sweden. So I got out of my year contract with him. And so I flew Nona home to South Dakota. Canada has these things in place where if it's winter time, you can't go through Canada alone. One of the technicians that I was working with, her husband was getting out of the military, and they lived in Florida. The technician and I talked about it, and she asked him if he would be willing to ride as far down as Seattle. You know, I could drop him at Seattle and then just go straight over to South Dakota. And that's how I fell in love with Idaho. I come across through Post Falls, and I like the mountains, and I like the seasons. I grew up in Georgia, and you just have hot and hotter and humid and more humid, you know. Michelle was born in March the next year. So I found a job at the little hospital there as an X-ray tech. And I thought I had a 30-day extension on my insurance that I had at the Anchorage hospital, but it turned out that I didn't. So with the expense of a baby, and then always about 2 months later, after Michelle was born, my wife had to have her gallbladder taken out. And so I was stuck with some debt for a while, and I couldn't start to school. I was going for a physician at that time. And I wound up living in that town where my wife was born for 3.5 years, trying to get my debts settled, and so I could go to school. The postmaster in that town, it's about the size of Grangeville, about 3,200 people, maybe, something like that. Postmaster, he started up a country western band. He had me come into the little band that he had. We had a piano player, and I played the acoustic guitar, and he played the steel guitar. And we played in the bars on the weekends, and wedding dances here and there. And you remember a country western singer named Bobby Bear? The old country tune, Detroit City? He made the postmaster an offer for us to come on the road with him. And that was in his heyday when he was coming up. He's in the Country Music Hall of Fame now, but I had the opportunity to go on the road with him, but I decided I better get my education. But after spending 3.5 years of working in a small town, I changed my mind about being a general practitioner to something that I could eventually have a portion of, work for myself. And so I decided on pharmacy school. It was just Michelle and Renee at the time, and we had decided to put off more children until I finished my college, which didn't happen. And so we made our plans to start the fall of '66. We sold a trailer we had purchased and took off and drove down to, it's a suburb of Atlanta, Marietta. That's where my brother lived and his wife. And the further I went along, the more interested it got, learning about all the drugs and about the physiology and how they work in your system and things like that. I made it through college and worked as an X-ray tech. By then we had all the kids. The third child was Craig. He was born in '67, and Stacy was born in '69. Burroughs Wellcome Pharmaceuticals made me an offer, and I don't know, it was probably 6 months after I graduated, and I had gotten my Georgia license in pharmacy, and so we made the move from Georgia up to North Carolina, And the Burroughs Welcome is located in Greenville, North Carolina. After 6 months of working there, I knew how to, all my job was being sure that my workers had the right amount of the right drug. And then you blended it in with, they make it into tablets or capsules or whatever. Managed to stay with Burroughs Welcome for about a year, and I couldn't stand the sandy soil and the bugs, and it's tobacco country around there, and God, it was miserable. And we didn't have a house that was air conditioned, so we had to open the windows at night and put fans in there, and you draw the humidity in, and you get mold on your walls and that kind of stuff. So I started contacting people in Idaho, and I wrote to the boards of pharmacy in Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana, all over, and job turned up in Grangeville. When I first came here, I did the circuit work. The guy in Grangeville was my contact, and but he had other, like Francis Orangen. I worked for those two. I worked for Dick Smith and Craigmont, and Ron Wells and Kamei. So I was on the circuit, but it wasn't a job that I had a lot of future in, because my whole reason for getting into pharmacy is that you eventually have a chance to get your own business, or at least a part of a business. Over the years, I had bought into Irwin Drug, and I got my shares paid off, and I started making some pretty decent money, and we started saving for a house. My wife, I'd promised her a house that she wanted, and so anyway, I was thinking we would probably downsize because the kids were all gone, but no. Oh, she loved that place, and she was showing it off to everybody, We moved in Thanksgiving of 2000, and she passed away in 2009. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and tried her on everything. You remember this a book that the Catholic people used to subscribe for, called Word Among Us? That's what I was doing, was reading the day's scripture to her. I had paused a little bit, and I was watching her breathing, and she took a really deep breath, and that was it, I'm happy with the wife I chose, and she influenced me quite a bit of getting into the Catholic Church. But it wasn't because we didn't visit other churches. And I grew up in the Southern Bible Belt. I hadn't been baptized anything, but they have a little bit of everything down there. And so I started taking the classes, and got baptized the following Easter. I'd like to see the kids get more interested in their faith, and their education. That's important to get that done. I did well, but I worked hard getting here and doing it,